Well, welcome to Book Sandwich Den. This is our first Book Sandwich Den of the season. So we have an exciting season. And today we have Joe Caparulo, who is going to talk about the book, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. Joe is a local writer and community volunteer. He's on the board of directors of the Friends of the Chemung County Library District and Community Arts of Elmira. In this book, Haidt analyzes the influence of the smartphone and social media on the lives of Gen Z youth, 12 to 27 years old. He concludes that this great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness. Haidt's thesis challenges us to find solutions that will help our children, our schools, and our families flourish in this dizzying digital world. So without further words, Joe.
Hi. Thank you, Barb, and want to compliment you once again on starting another great season of Book Sandwich Den, along with Diane.
And Phyllis.
And Phyllis, who is here. Yeah. Where is she? There she is. And it's interesting because we're starting the first review with a book about social psychology in general, and finishing the series with a presentation of poetry and art. So, you know, there's one great thing about this book series is that cover all genres and not afraid to tackle some of the complex problems of our age. You have the generation sheet in front of you, and I just put that out there just to give everyone a sense of where Generation Z is and the panoply of ongoing movement in the age of our society, and to kind of maybe reflect on where you were as a maturing young adult during those particular periods. If you can recall anything that was going on socially or that kind of thing that gave you pause, put a nice word on anxiety, then, you know, maybe share throughout the hour or reflect on how what children now are going through with what you had to go through, if they even compare. So, this subject is somewhat in process. When I decided to do this book, I didn't really know how much of a social upheaval was behind its writing. And now that after I started, it seemed like every day there was a story on the front page of the newspaper, or an essay in some periodical, or a book review on TV with various viewpoints about what Jonathan Haidt has said here. So it's been very interesting. It's been very exciting as far as trying to make sense of what is initially thought of as kind of a straight shot. Oh, of course, you know, children are becoming unsettled because of social media. But the more I dug into it, the more I found out, well, although I think the book is fantastic and it's been a #1 New York Times bestseller list forever, or since it was printed, there are some hitches in the theory. Okay, so maybe towards the end we'll talk about those. So I'm going to be reading from the book in general in the first part of the presentation, and then other things will happen. It wasn't until teens got smartphones that they could be online all the time, even when away from home. According to a survey of U.S. parents conducted by Common Sense Media, by 2016, 79% of teens owned a smartphone. That's a lot of teens. As did 28% of children between the ages of 8 and 12. As adolescents got smartphones, they began spending more time in the virtual world. A 2015 Common Sense report found that teens with a social media account reported spending about 2 hours a day on social media. And teens overall reported spending an average of nearly 7 hours a day of leisure time, not counting school and homework, on screen media, which includes playing video games and watching videos on Netflix, YouTube, or pornography sites. A 2015 report by Pew Research confirms these high numbers. 1 out of every 4 teens said that they were online almost constantly. By 2022, that number had nearly doubled to 46%. So it partially explains some of the activity you see when teens are walking down the street and you're worried about what's going to happen when they hit the crosswalk, because they're not looking up. They're looking straight ahead into their phone. Between 2010 and 2015, the social lives of American teens moved largely onto smartphones with continuous access to social media, online video games, and other internet-based activities. This great rewiring of childhood. Now, I don't know if this is his phrase or something he garnered from another source, but he calls it the great rewiring of childhood. He argues is the single largest reason for the tidal wave of adolescent mental illness that began in the early 2010s. The first generation of Americans who went through puberty with smartphones and the entire internet in their hands became more anxious, depressed, self-harming, and suicidal. By now, we now call that Generation Z, Gen Z, in contrast to the millennial generation, which had largely finished puberty when the great rewiring began in 2010. The point here being that the development of young children's brains and mental capacities was undergoing change, undergoing growth, and undergoing places that were influenced by its environment. Whereas the millennials, their brains were 80% developed and 20% of their brain was connected. And I won't get into the details of what all that means, just to say that immature brains had a very, very hard time sorting out what was going on when social media was rising. The tidal wave of anxiety, depression, and self-harm hit girls harder than boys, and it hit preteen girls hardest of all. Free play is an essential for developing social skills, like conflict resolution, as it is for developing physical skills. But play-based childhoods were replaced by phone-based childhoods. This is one aspect of this whole debate that many people, including myself, didn't really concentrate on. What we were concentrating on is the fact that how do they learn anything in school when they're always looking at their phone? but it's also about what happens when they're not in school. When they're not in school, they're home looking at screens again, or they're somewhere else, at a friend's house looking at screens. They're not out in nature enjoying their environment or playing together, thinking up the games, having social interaction, etc. Free play is essential for developing social skills like conflict resolution, as it is for developing physical skills. But play-based childhoods were replaced by phone-based childhoods, as children and adolescents move their social lives and free time onto internet-connected devices. Children learn through play to connect, synchronize, and take turns. They enjoy attunement and need enormous quantities of it. Attunement and synchrony bond pairs, groups, and whole communities. Social media, in contrast, is mostly asynchronous and performative. There is no interaction on social media at the social level with people in present of each other. It inhibits attunement and leaves heavy users starving for social connection. The human brain contains two subsystems that put it into two common modes: discover mode for approaching opportunities, and defend mode for defending against threats. Young people born around 1995 are more likely to be stuck in defend mode compared to those born earlier. They are on permanent alert for threats rather than being hungry for new experiences. They are anxious. One thing that I like about Haidt is that he is very definitive in when he makes a statement. He doesn't quibble about his viewpoint. All children are by nature anti-fragile. Just as the immune system must be exposed to germs and trees must be exposed to wind, children require exposure to setbacks, failures, shocks, and stumbles in order to develop strength and self-reliance. Overprotection interferes with this development and renders young people more likely to be fragile and fearful as adults. Kids must have a great deal of free play to develop, and they benefit from risky physical play, which has anti-phobic effects. Kids seek out the level of risk and thrill that they are ready for in order to master their fears and develop competencies. Risk-taking online may not have comparable anti-phobic effects. The worship of safety above all else is called safetyism. It is dangerous because it makes it harder for children to learn, to care for themselves, and to deal with risk, conflict, and frustration. Children are most likely to thrive when they have a play-based childhood in the real world. They are less likely to thrive when fearful parenting and phone-based childhood deprive them of opportunities for growth. In this area of how much protection children should be given, whether they should walk home from school, we've seen the effects of this over the past 5 to 10 years painted out in our community, and how we look upon children. More and more, they are potential victims. It seems no matter what they're doing, they are going to be threatened in some way or other. His argument is way, way overboard. We've taken away children's right to be children. He notes the 4 foundational harms. he sums them up as being social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction. Social deprivation is all about children being outside, children being on their own, children being able to do things without being instructed, children being able to be creative and spontaneous in a way that gives them confidence. Social deprivation takes many forms, but I mean, we can all remember, I can remember what I did after school. I walked home either alone or with a gang of kids, and anything could happen, and usually did, but I got home. But if you think about that trip that you took from school to home, and what you learned, that, it was really a gift. Sleep deprivation speaks for itself. Having the cell phone under the covers and listening to videos and so on. 2 to 3 hours sleep is, becoming a norm for teens and kids. Attention fragmentation is all about the stuff that we hear about in schools and the difficulty that teachers have in promoting education when they are in conflict with everything happening all at once is a good way to describe what goes on with the cell phone. It's the entire world at an instant's notice. And the temptation of that fact is overpowering for many children. There are many, many different ways to go about defining social media and what it means. You have user profiles, you have user-generated content, you have networking, you have interactivity. All of those things occur on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, Reddit, LinkedIn, the list goes on. But the way in which these companies who own these platforms lure children to get attention is strictly an economic equation. They want children to look at their cell phone so products from large companies can be sold. It's a two-way operation. The companies such as Apple and Instagram and Facebook want children to look at certain pages on their platforms so they can proceed to buy something or tell their parents they want something that they saw, and it is an economic equation that produces great harm because no one benefits except the companies at the end of the day. Front-facing cameras made problems even worse when you're, selfies. Made it easier for everyone to consume everything quickly. The sheer amount of time that adolescents spend with their phones is staggering, even compared with the high levels of screen time they had before the invention of the iPhone. Studies of time used routinely find that the average teen reports spending more than 7 hours a day on screen-based leisure activities, not including school and homework. The opportunity cost of a phone-based childhood refers to everything that children do less of once they get unlimited, round-the-clock access to the internet. Yeah, so how do you form a strong character How do you form a creative personality? How do you form someone who's well-educated, well-informed, and able to discern what is going on around them in their environment if they are constantly on the internet, social media, whatever kind of site is available to them at that particular time. It's really frightening in a way, because some children mature out of it, and some children never get out of the spiral. I thought it would be important to talk about the reasons that social media harms girls more than boys. Girls are more sensitive to visual comparisons, especially when other people praise or criticize one's face and body. When I read this, I was a little, okay, is Haidt being a little bit too stereotyped? Is he stereotyping? Is he being overly discriminatory? Are these judgments or are these scientific fact? The jury's still out. But the first is that girls are more sensitive to visual comparisons, especially when other people praise or criticize one's face and body. Visually oriented social media platforms that focus on images of oneself are ideally suited to pushing down a girl's sociometer, which is the internal gauge of where one stands in relationship to others. Girls are also more likely to develop socially prescribed perfectionism, in which a person tries to live up to impossibly high standards held by others or by society. Girls' aggression is often expressed in attempts to harm the relationships and reputation of other girls, whereas boys' aggression is more likely to be expressed in physical ways. Social media has offered girls endless ways to damage other girls' relationships and reputations. Girls and women more readily share emotions. When everything moved online and girls became hyper-connected, girls with anxiety or depression might have influenced many other girls to develop anxiety and depression. Girls are also more vulnerable to sociogenic illnesses, which means illnesses caused by social influence rather than from a biological cause. And finally, the internet has made it easier for men to approach and stalk girls and women and to behave badly toward them while avoiding accountability. When preteen girls open social media accounts, they are often followed and contacted by older men, and they are pressured by boys in their school to share nude photographs of themselves. Social media is a trap that ensnares more girls than boys. It lures people in with the promise of connection and communion, but then it multiplies numbers of relationships while reducing their quality, therefore making it harder to spend time with a few close friends in real life. This may be why loneliness spiked so sharply among girls in the early 2010s, while for boys, the rise was more gradual. As with social media for girls, spending hours connecting with others online produced an increase in the quantity of social interactions and a decrease in the quality of social relationships. More interactions, less relationships. Boys, like girls, became lonelier during the Great Rewiring. Some boys use video games to strengthen their real-world packs, but for many others, video games made it easier for them to retreat to their bedrooms rather than doing the hard work of maturing in the real world. The great rewiring of childhood pulled young people out of real-world communities, including their own families, and created a new kind of childhood lived in multiple rapidly shifting networks. One inevitable result was anomie, or normlessness, because stable and binding moralities cannot form when everything is in flux, including the members of the network. As Emile Durkheim showed, anomie breeds despair and suicide. This may be why boys and girls who followed different paths through the Great Rewiring ended up in the same place, with a sudden and rapid increase in the feeling that their lives were meaningless. Then goes to talk about collective action problems. And essentially what he's saying is, children will do, especially teens, they tend to do what everyone else is doing. And if everyone else is doing activity A, which is everybody's on Facebook or everybody's on Instagram, they gotta be on Instagram. If everybody's switching to another site, then everybody's going. It's a way for everyone to feel as if they're part of the group. There's a acronym called FOMO. It stands for fear of missing out. It's a great anxiety for children to feel as if they're not part of what everybody else is having fun with or excited with. And this drives, it falls under the rubric of collective action problems. So there are experiments about what if everyone agreed to not be on Facebook. Well, they found out that children and teenagers, it's not so much that they love Facebook. It's the fact that their friends or the people they know online are on Facebook. That is why they're attracted to it. So what if everybody goes off it? Well, then it's over. But you get this continuous flood of attractivity and everyone's saying, oh, I'm not going to get off because so-and-so is on. Once a few students get smartphones and social media accounts, the other students put pressure on their parents, putting them into a trap as well. It is painful for parents to hear their children say, everyone else has a smartphone. If you don't get me one, I'll be excluded from everything. Few parents want their preteens to disappear into a phone, but the vision of their child being a social outcast is even more distressing. Many parents therefore give in and buy their child a smartphone at age 11 or younger. As more parents relent, pressure grows on the remaining kids and parents until the community reaches a stable but unfortunate equilibrium. Everyone really does have a smartphone. Everyone disappears into their phones, and the play-based childhood is over. Yeah, kids are no longer recreating, playing, enjoying each other's company in person, but interacting online. The solutions to all this activity with smartphones and children is still being discussed, and we'll talk about some of those things. Yeah, okay. U.S. middle and high schools have seen an increase in mental illness and psychological suffering among their students since the early 2010s. Many are implementing a variety of policies in response. Most schools say they ban phones, but that typically means only that students must not use their phones during class. This is an ineffective policy because it incentivizes students to hide their phones use during class and increase their phone use after class, which makes it harder for them to form friendships with kids around them. The better policy is to go phone-free for the entire school day. When students arrive, they should put their phones in a dedicated phone locker or a lockable phone pouch. The second is becoming a playful school. The simple addition of a Let Grow Play Club, an afternoon option in K through 8 schools of playing on the school playground with no phones, minimal adult supervision, may teach social skills and reduce anxiety better than any educational program, because free play is nature's way of accomplishing these goals. There's water here. When all the families in a neighborhood or town give their children more free play and independence, it solves the collective action problem. Parents are no longer afraid to give their children more unsupervised free play and independence, which children need to overcome normal childhood anxieties and develop into healthy adults. And then he goes into a little ending philosophy about being a parent is always a challenge, and it has become far more challenging in our era of rapid social and technological change. However, there is a lot that parents can do to become better gardeners, those who create a space in which their children can learn and grow, in contrast to carpenters. Makes the distinction between gardeners and carpenters. The carpenters try to mold and shape their children directly. If you do one thing to be a better gardener in the real world, it should be to give your children far more unsupervised, free play. That sends shivers down the spines of many people, because they can't. I mean, we went through the early phases of the visuals of children on, I remember milk cartons, that visual of lost children, kidnapped children, children who had been abducted, and that, you know, that atmosphere in the United States through the 90s was all pervasive, and it's continuing with just story after story, made up stories even, on the internet about the dangers that children face. Predation is huge, a huge topic, but it tends to leak into every aspect of what children's lives need to be. What exactly are we leaving our children at the end of the day? If everything is dangerous, if every moment has to be supervised, if every street corner is a dangerous street corner, what's left? What happens to that child's growth and development? If you do one thing to be a better gardener in the real world, it should be to give your children for far more unsupervised free play of the sort you probably enjoyed at that age. That means giving them a longer and better play-based childhood, with ever-growing independence and responsibility. So that's the highlights, I think, of John Haidt's book. Just the notes that talk about the issue specifically. There are many, many other wonderful things that he states in this book regarding the topic that I encourage you to read. So with that, we'll end this section with Q&A, or questions and comments if you have any.
What does the author say about COVID infections and the isolation caused by COVID infections?
Yeah. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but the COVID amplifies the isolation of children at home. It kind of doubles down on trying to get them out of the house, away from their computers and away from their screens, and it makes them more isolated from playtime and other friends. So one of the reasons Generation Z is so particularized is that you have COVID, you have climate change, you have gun violence, and you have the rise of smartphones and other social issues that converged at the same time this generation was maturing, puberty. So what happened during COVID is still being debated, especially when it comes to schools. Close the schools. Well, they're finding out now that the people, the schools that were closed and the children that weren't in the classroom, their education suffered dramatically. And now they're playing catch up. I don't think we'll ever see schools closing during a COVID outbreak, because the weight of learning, the importance of the weight of learning on children and families far outweighs the potential for being quarantined for 7 days, or whatever the quarantine currently is. He does mention COVID. I didn't get into the COVID issue.
My daughter has a daughter who's just becoming a teenager. So what she did was, and they had the worst spikes imaginable, she wanted a cell phone. So all her friends had a cell phone, and she didn't want to be isolated. But they did not want her getting involved with the media, social media. They gave her a cell phone so she could call home, call her friends, but that was all. And that seemed to help in the situation.
That you're saying the cell phone helped?
At least so that she could contact
Yeah.
her parents.
The language of when we start talking about phones in the age of anxiety and depression and mental illness, a cell phone is not a smartphone. So smartphones are the gateway to everything, including very damaging sites that children can easily access, despite all kinds of announcements that we can keep them from doing that. They're much smarter than we think they are. Anyway, the smartphone is the way to distraction and danger as far as the cell phone. You can make calls, but in your case, I don't know, that's one step to the good.
Yeah.
If everybody has a telephone in their pocket, sure. But talking to each other on the phone is not the problem. Hi. Hey.
Hi, thank you so much for taking this time, Joe. And thanks for the book sandwich and no sandwiches, it's good. I think, as with any book like this, he's coming at it in a way that, of course, leads to the fact that you can't simplify any of this. We're talking about children in this situation. We're also talking about the sociological changes over time in communities, where at one time, for instance, people would work in or close to their community, and also that schools could be walked to. And that's very dramatically different in this day. There are some places who are still lucky enough to live in those kind of communities, but I've lived in West Elmira for a number of years, and I remember that change where you go to the grocery store walking nearby, and we could also walk kids to school. We still can do this with the library and playing fields, etc. But there are a lot of communities who don't have this. And there was also the experience I had growing up, where I had a working mother, but there was always some mom who was still at home. And that was sort of the central place. People would end up over there. We would play, this idyllic thing now, of the notion that kids could play freely and they could be out everywhere. I also remember there were places that was warned, do not go near this place. Don't walk by, for instance, the foundry in town, because there were people who worked there who would stand and stare at girls as they walked by. And they would also, we certainly knew of situations where girls were raped, boys were also attacked. It was not a safe environment. And also sociologically, the way this view of his view of women, all of that is true, but it's also been reinforced by males' attitude toward women and by social attitudes toward women generally. Yeah, I think you can see it in the screen now, where I'm going to make this political. You have somebody running for office whose attitude toward women is extraordinarily negative, and they only have a particular value. This whole thing is just the kind of thing where technology is something humans are really good at developing, but long-range planning isn't really developing. And we've seen this chaotic push-pull back and forth kind of thing for generation after generation. And the most laughable part is the way the greatest generation was given that name by somebody who was commercially selling a book. And this is not, I mean, my family starts there. My mother was born in 1902. My father was born in 1894.
Wow.
My siblings were born in the quote silent generation. I can tell you they weren't. And then I've got kids born in the baby boomers era and the Generation X. I mean, this is multi-generational issues, and I in an advantage point to be able to see over a long period of time those changes. And coming from working class, some of these things that are sort of idealistic notions of things, and the idea that a suburb would be the ideal thing, which then also puts a whole new set of restrictions and too many freedoms maybe. So like you keep those people out, you're in, and now the rise of gun violence and the way politics is used to help commercial enterprises has been a real disaster for all of us. So I'm just saying, this is a really important topic because I think it does rise this kind of thing. This is one of the things that's good about a book club. You can start saying, wow, look at this issue. Maybe we should think about how we can bring back more volunteerism and bring something more to this. Instead of saying, oh dear, these children. It's not the children. We're all connected.
Yes. I was going to reflect on speaking of the generations in terms of protecting children and what kind of activities are going on now to what was going on back when I was a growing young boy. In the 50s. I remember there was a movie in 1960, it's called, it was a remake of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. Rod Taylor was the rising star at that time. Remember Rod? Yvette Mimieux was one of the co-stars. Anyway, I was into science fiction and that kind of genre film. However, I was also a proud standing member of the Catholic Church. So I had to, first I asked my mom, Mom, can I go see the time machine? No, Joe. I said, well, why? So we looked on the list of movies that were covered by the Legion of Decency. Now, the Legion of Decency, when I thought about it in retrospect, I thought, this is a great name for one of the Marvel comic, get 4 people together, call them the Legion of Decency, get them out there to fight, Justice League, and we'll have a real... So she called the pastor for a dispensation, because at that moment, the time machine, according to the Legion of Decency, was a rated C, I guess condemned. So it prevented me, anyway, to make a long story short, I could not go see the time machine. And I'm thinking, you compare it to what kids are looking at, what's available to them now, all the time. And, they talk about, what's on the internet, pornography-wise. But I watch TV at night, and man, a hair's breadth away from very inappropriate things for children on television, let alone, I know what, the pornography business is all about, but it's amazing how those changes have occurred. And to your point about the children and the outdoors, one of the things he mentions is more play-oriented areas for children to be in outdoors. It's not necessarily about walking home, going past dangerous street corners, but it's about the schools need to let children out more often on recesses. They need to have more models of creative play when you have simply no structures made of steel and concrete that kids can put their life in danger when they go. These are the kind of things that were, when I was growing up, what did you call that thing that went around you ran? Yeah, and the monkey bars, all that stuff was pre-existing. Haidt is encouraging, make your own obstacles, make your own games, take a few risks. Risk-taking is being also not because of its potential danger. But again, risk-taking is also preparation for the stuff you're going to have to face when you get older. And if you're not ready to take risks, you are not going to, according to many sociologists, not going to succeed. But just since this issue has risen, again, like I was saying, the articles that come out. So no screens for children under 2, according to Sweden. Now, the whole country has gotten together to say, here's what's going to go down. No screens for children under 2, an hour maximum for children ages 2 to 5, 2 hours for children 6 to 12. Let's keep track of this. Sweden recommends that parents follow age limits provided by social media. No screens before bedtime or in the bedroom, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, this is a whole country that's coming down with these suggestions about social media. And then at the very bottom, what are the criticisms of no screens? Some researchers think this policy is simply unrealistic. Good, yeah, it is unrealistic. What parent has not handled fussy children? What parent has not handed fussy children a screen to keep them quiet in public or devise some much-needed alone time? Professor of Human Behavior and Technology at Oxford said the bans could be shaming parents who have a few other options to make a different choice. He also said the amount of time it takes amount of time is less important than the type of activities on a phone. That's true. Of course, we all know about what New York State is doing. A lot of back and forth in the legislative level. Nothing's been decided yet, but will be soon. The bills will be talked about soon. The Surgeon General, why I'm calling for a warning label on social media platforms. He's chiming in. Then there is also the idea that climate change itself is causing changes in behavior. And here we get into the causation correlation arguments about what Haidt is saying. Is this a cause, or is it just correlated to other things which may have precedence over them? You know, like loneliness. If children are already lonely, do they go to social media as a refuge? Of course, what they'll find is an increase of activity that produces more loneliness, because they'll find out that, oh, so-and-so doesn't like me. I'm not a member of that group. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm chomping at the bit
Yeah.
here. You had said so much that really triggered some strong feelings in me. And so I'll apologize if I kind of go all over the page, but it is a cause. And
Mhm.
I don't think that there's any difficulty in proving that, because the difference between things that happen naturally or organically versus what's happening online is that our children are being tracked the same way our behaviors are tracked.
Yeah.
So every time you log into something, every time you, if you're the lonely kid, you're already inclined to go to the site for lonely kids, for the kids who are isolated, or the kids who, I'm sorry to say, will be attracted or find it appealing to find the ultimate way to make people pay. You know, it's, if you take your own life or whatever, you'll show them, you know. So
Yeah.
first of all, there's that. Okay, it is a cause. Secondly, I would go so far as to say I've not read the whole book. I have heard the author himself speak about his book and speak in a lengthy interview and be asked some of the questions that you're suggesting to us that we asked, and really defended or said, defended it sufficely to my thinking. He's not overstating anything.
Mhm.
He really is not. It's very difficult to hear, but some of you who know me real well, and actually Lynn is gone, I first developed an aversion to too much technology when I was a high school teacher for 30 years. And my first problem was encountering one class after another, forget the generational marks, but just year to year or semester to semester. And I taught seniors, and I taught seniors who were in advanced classes, supposedly. And discovering how much they could not do for themselves because they were reliant on computers to do it for them. And I know I've said to Joe and Lynn, who had to hear me preach on this a couple of times, my big problem, and I would say to students in defending making them learn to research the old-fashioned way, go to the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature. They had no idea what that was. And I said, it's a reference book that lists everything that's ever been published in, not in book length, so that you have short, multiple sources to go to, and so on. Anyway, I had kids who, back in the late 1980s, this was, who had never heard of that, okay? And the problem is that when they're on a computer, they push a button looking for an answer, and if they don't get the answer with A, they have no idea what their next step should be. That's a problem. When you go to phones amped all of that up. They give them access to so much more. And it's continuous, and not only is it continuous access, it's aggressive. As a teacher who was constantly fighting, you looking at your phone instead of listening to what we're talking about and so on. I promise you, Haidt is not overstating the damage that has been done to a whole generation and a half of children.
Yeah.
The other thing, and it brings in some of what you were saying, and some of what I was hearing over here, when he does identify 4 major problems that we have because
Foundation.
of kids and social media and whatever. A 5th one, and I think it's something that we danced around in so much of the other discussion, a 5th problem is adults need to own their responsibility in this. You said we're awfully good at developing technology, but not with long-term planning. I would say we're not awfully good with accepting responsibility for the consequences.
Mhm.
How many parents set the example by putting their phone down? How many parents say there's this many hours a day, no phone? How many parents have the guts to say to their kiddo, there are lots of ways to socialize besides a smartphone. You can have a cell phone if you feel like that's safety, and if you have that private communication with one other party. Okay, you're not plugging into social media. But how many parents have the guts to do that? To be the one to say, okay, everybody else might have a smartphone, but
Yeah.
not you.
Well, I'm just going to cut in with one comment. We've got a break, I think. Not break, but...
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because that's good, we could go on for a long time. But an article in the New York Times, September 15th, the headline, it's a small 1-column front page story, but it's extreme stress over parenting brings warning. Okay? In his recent advisory on parents' mental health, the United States Surgeon General has been doing a lot of proclamations lately. This Dr. Vivek Murthy said out loud what many parents might have only furtively admitted. Parenting today is too hard and stressful.
And if I can add one more point, but you know what, add one more point. Something that I heard the author say on this exchange on Book TV. He said, you know, you were saying, geez, when we were growing up, and when Joe was talking about you could walk home from school and so on, parenting is stressful. A lot of it is the fact that our society's norms. How many people have we heard say, we don't even know we are anymore. We're so polarized, we're so this and that. That's all been fed by the social media and the tracking, okay? But in addition to that, the fact that we have an extraordinarily and abnormally litigious society, okay? So everybody's looking out to make sure they cover their butts on everything, including that you don't serve pizza if you didn't get a food permit, okay? Even pizza that's not made on site. But we're overly litigious, okay? So the public officials are coming out and making these recommendations and so on. As far as kids not walking home from school, I would argue it's not because of the crazy number of abductions and that, you know, stranger abductions or whatever, and that made people change those policies. In school systems, former school teachers, several sisters who still are, they went to universal busing so that when you closed, if you were going to call a closure for weather purposes, you wouldn't be discriminating against kids who could walk a certain distance, but not those who can't. We're just going to deliver everything. Okay. So it's stressful to the extent that we have taken these individual concerns, helicopter parenting, and taken it to a social level. And so everybody's always worried about their liabilities. You know, if you have a play date with your kids and whatever, so there's that.
Yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to raise that he said was you go back to earlier generations, when the stresses were every bit as great,
More.
if of a different nature, you go back and you look at the time right after the World Wars when we were in the Cold War, and in schools, you were having children practice raid,
Scare raids.
shelter and so on, okay?
Yeah,
You poll kids then, or parents then, the stress levels that they reported were lower than they are now. And you were literally being trained to hide for your life.
The girls had to make sure their skirts were down. Yeah.
So what's
Teacher went
different,
around.
what's different is this bombardment of stuff. I would also,
Kay's got a question, you're gonna.
I'd venture to guess that it's terrible to say, but if you were able to add up all of the number of youth who were taken by stranger abductions and whatever during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and compare that to the number of youth who are lured into predatory behavior
Mhm.
and lured onto the streets, I bet you that number's greater.
Mm.
I bet you social we can prove numerically.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
I think about students that are in sports or music, they don't have a lot of time and want to graduate or be on the honor roll. Where do they find time for all this? And they're occupied with other things. And I want to leave you with, I am really a war baby born 1941 to 1945, 1943. And they were called war babies. And they were,
Yeah.
it's not listed here.
The names on those are not official. There's many sources for this whole, where generations fall and what they're called. Some are accurate, some aren't. But they're generally in the ballpark. And war baby sounds right to me.
It is. I've always
Okay.
considered myself.
I think one of the things this book reflects too is America's self-absorption itself. This is the way, this is a problem that is part of who we are as
Mhm.
well. Because my kids live in Europe, two kids who live in Europe, and the one who lives in Spain, and then the ones who have lived in Italy have said, we're actually living in countries that really love children. Not like here where it's talked about, and children are made to be, the center of whatever, often for commercial reasons. But in those countries, they are really loved, so they're safer, and families, and strangers, for instance, the children are told, you can talk to strangers, but you never go anywhere with them. So there's this rule, and so kids are free to talk to other people much more comfortably, and they are much safer. And I'm sure there are other things that happen in these countries, but generally speaking, children are valued, that the schools, the health programs, all of these things reflect that fact.
Right, right. Good point.
Well, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Very
All right. Well, I hope to be here again sometime.